This subject, democracy, freedom, and consciousness, is very significant for our time because it is also a development in the human life process in this planet which is connected with that. It is a step where the humanity moves beyond the approach of power, approach of force, approach of manipulating through fear and greed, into a way of connecting to each other on the level of acceptance and respect. And that is the beautiful thing about the democracy, that it is a way of going about social and human coexistence, where everybody is accepted and respected as individuals. Of course, this acceptance and respect does not happen automatically, because we are all carrying many unconscious processes which are working in us, and we are reacting mostly on the basis of these conditionings. So it is why the real development of democracy in a healthy level can only happen when there is the possibility of consciousness brought into it, when it is seen that we, even though we may have very good ideas and we may mean well, but in the normal way of reacting, we are reacting on the basis of our conditioning. To recognize this is very significant, because then you can realize that not only that you are reacting on the basis of conditionings, others are also seeing and interpreting every word, every situation, every conflict, every challenge in such a way that unless they are seeing their own conditioning, their own automatism inside, they don't have the distance, and then they are believing that the way they see, the way they interpret, this is the reality, this is the truth. So it's a very delicate and deep process which has to happen when we want that the human beings are not only human beings on a physical level, but also become human in a true sense, where we bring the potential of understanding, peace, and love into realization. Humanity becomes human when we see that we don't need to react to each other just on the level of the animal, where when something is going against us or going different than what we expect or imagine, that we should fight against it, we should suppress it, we should try to control it. That is the unconscious level of reacting. That is the conditioned way which we have. And we need to consciously, deliberately reconsider, to question, to bring it into an inner transparency. What is happening in me? What way am I reacting? What is the basis? What are the standards? What are the values which are working in me? From where does it come? Is it coming from my intelligence? Is it coming from my clarity? Is it what is really true? You see, it will be intelligent to consider it in a simple way. Each word has a different association for anybody. Just I was saying the other day to somebody, just even use the common word which people are having for food, garlic. For some it is like, wow, it's such a healthy thing and it's helping one to stay healthy and it's very tasty and all that. But for some others it is feeling like, oh my God, it stings, how can you eat that? And they have other associations. So each word, look at another word, wine. For some it is a part of being with the society, being with each other and being with certain situations where they are friendly, going in a loving way. So it is a one association. But for the others who see it differently, who understand it differently, for example, when they have seen also how it becomes addictive, they have seen that it is a kind of thing which affects the sensibility and consciousness, and that people get into the habit and it affects their whole life. It becomes very destructive. So there are different perceptions, and for one it is maybe just the beautiful associations, but for another it is more the, for example, if they have had a family where the parents were into alcohol and the children have suffered from it, then the parents' experience reflect the perception of the children. We are in a world where we are able to see these things more clearly, where we are having the possibility to understand ourselves and each other more deeply. And also the whole development of the communication process of the media, of the internet, and also the possibility of traveling. It all has made it possible for us to see that life is much more varietyful. Life is much more complex. And what we consider as values of good and right and sensible may be seen in another society, in another background, in a very different way. And the more you are alert about it, the more you see that I cannot say that the way I appear to interpret things, this is the ultimate truth. You can see that there's so much of a projection. And we have to learn to look at the reality without getting trapped in these conditionings, in these projections, in these prisms which come in between us and the reality. And that is what consciousness is all about. You become conscious to observe what is working between you and the reality. And when you can see that, you can put this whole one-sided way of interpreting everything aside and look at it in a more simple and direct way. It's very interesting when we look in our development as a human being. Every child comes to the world and looks at everything with a quality of innocence, with a quality where one is looking at everything full of wonder, is playful, is joyous. It has been our innermost reality, and it is the quality which we have all in us. But it is in the process of life that we get into the conditionings, we get into a role, we get into a personality, we get into certain kind of beliefs, pick up standards and values, go into comparison and competition. So this is the game. This is relevant, but we have to see that this is not seeing the reality the way it is. It is a projection. It's a projection through our past. The moment we are able to see that, we are also able to understand ourselves more deeply. And interestingly, the deeper we understand ourselves, the deeper we understand the other. The more we recognize how the conditionings are working in us. And very often the conditionings are picked up by us without our considering if it is good or bad in a deeper sense. Every child picks up things which are feeling relevant for the survival. For example, if in the family there is somebody who is shouting and screaming and get everything through that, the child sees that and says, that's success formula. It starts doing the same thing, because when one sees that, through that one can get what one wants. But that is not an answer. That is not coming from our intelligence, and that is not the way we would go when we would consider now. because that is not looking at the reality, that is not considering the other, that's not looking what actually is the situation. It's a one-sided way of reacting. So there are many survival conditioned factors which are working in us. Even though when we logically speak about things, we can understand and agree with many things, but in our normal way of reacting, we are mostly reacting on the basis of the conditioning, especially of the first part of our life. This is important to realize this, because once you see this, then you can also see that democracy cannot happen automatically. Democracy of accepting and respecting each other can happen only when we can see that differences are not something which we need to encounter only through fear. Differences are part of a development in life process. So somebody who is having a different opinion, somebody who is critical, somebody who is different, does not need to agree with us completely, and we need not try to force the other into believing that the way I see things is the right thing. But when we don't have the distance to ourselves and when we are not aware of the conditioning, that's what we are often trying to do. That is why I say that it is a step from the approach of power and force and intimidation and manipulation into a new way of understanding, connecting to each other more through deeper perception of the reality, where it becomes more sympathetic, more compassionate. Where we start seeing that just like one can see it in oneself, one is wanting somehow to come in terms with life. One wants to live joyously. One wants to love and be loved. One wants to have fun. One wants to be happy. And once you see that, that is the case with everybody. Everybody is trying in their way, with their kind of background, with their kind of conditionings, with their kind of standards which they have picked up. And then you see that, hey, let us try to understand each other rather than just reacting blindly to each other and punishing each other, condemning each other, giving people guilt feeling and going into revengefulness. Because that doesn't solve the problem. We can, through force, through power, through punishment, try to control something for a while, but we are keeping the other still in the grip of fear, in the grip of feeling there as being a loser. And that is not a state where something beautiful can develop. It is more that the other is waiting for the moment where the other can hit back, the other can take revenge. So in this unconscious way of going, we are reacting more like animals, or in the worst case, more like robots, which has more destructive processes. And we keep each other in fear. We keep each other in this belief that we are just this personality, we are just this so-called I, which we are used to identifying with. But the reality is we are much more. We are part of a deeper reality. We are part of a reality which is deeply interconnected. And this is what those who have been going deeper in their life in different ways come to realize. That is why consciousness is one of the bridges towards seeing, understanding and realizing, so that you experience yourself. You are not taking somebody's words and repeating it. You recognize yourself that it is so. And when it is your recognition, when it is your experiential understanding, when you have seen, observed, recognized, when it's an experiential basis, then it is clear. It is not believing somebody. You see it. And this is very, very important. Otherwise, in our fear, we are trying, mostly unconsciously, trying to control, trying to suppress, trying to manage, to manipulate, and mainly our focus is on the other. We think that the others have to change. What makes a difference is when we see that it is happening like that, and we gain a distance to our own conditioning, then it becomes very different. Then we realize, hey, I can go differently. When we have conflicts, we don't need to hit each other and kill each other and destroy and go into punishing and destructive processes. We can look for creative, intelligent, more healthy, sensible ways of dealing with the conflict. And that is what activates our intelligence. That's what activates our creative potential. And that's what activates our humanness. That's why it is very significant to understand that democracy is not just a system which is there and then once it is there it will work by itself. No. It is just like a skeleton. What you make on the skeleton is what is making the difference. And it is an ongoing process because it needs that we understand how our perceptions and functionings are going on. To make things easier, we try to reduce everything to the most obvious. And to make it more easy, we reduce it all into simple ways of dealing. It is fine for the functionality, but we often forget from where it all has come. It is just like, to put it in a more understandable way, now in our modern times we have the water coming from the pipeline. We have the electricity there, we switch on a light and switch on the process switch and the light is coming. We can have the cooking plate going. We have the chip card and we can put it in the bank automat and then the money is coming out. So we see it's very practical, it is very good, but we lose the connection to the whole development, to the whole background. We get so much in this abstraction that we don't realize there are many other factors involved in it all. And it needs an ongoing recognition of it so that it can be kept alive in a healthy way. When it comes to mechanical things, it can work. But when it comes to human feelings, human understanding of each other, it needs to be again and again through interaction, through conscious communication, through creative way of responding to each other, to be rejuvenated, to be revitalized. I was putting for the first day's talk, democracy or democracy. And why democracy? Because democracy without the right understanding and awareness can easily get watered down. And somebody who is not having the right understanding coming into power can use the whole democratic institutions in such a way to manipulate, to control, that suddenly there is no democracy, it's more a demonstration of craziness, demonstration of blind greed, blind seeking of power, and very destructive developments happening through that. Very unsensible, inhuman processes. So democracy has to be kept alive through an ongoing deepening of alertness, awareness, understanding. And this is very decisive. Otherwise you can see what's happening in the world. You can see that even in a country like America, the democratic institutions are only working as long as there are people who understand the values and recognize the significance of it. But when it's not, then anybody can manipulate, anybody can control, and it's always on the verge. You can also see now in the present situation, because there are some people looking beyond their party structures, standing for the deeper values, for what is true, what is reality, and not letting themselves get intimidated, manipulated, put down. So it is creating a balancing factor. But this understanding of the values, this understanding to orient to the good, to orient to the truth, to orient to that what is human and loving, is very, very important. And it is not easy, because there is an ongoing erosion happening. You don't need to do anything for it. When you don't consider certain things, everything becomes a habit. And when something becomes a habit, it is like we fall asleep. One can put it in this way. If you have a garden where you want to grow flowers and herbs and all that, if you just leave it like that, then all kind of other plants will come, which are, in a way, in this context, they are the weeds. Of course, the weeds may have another function, but when you want to take care of the garden, and that these flowers can come into blossoming, then you need to support them. Some of them needs much more care. So it is something like that. When you want the human sensibility to stay alive, you have to bring it again and again into a conscious recognition. What is making it good, important? Why is the good good? And why is that what is called bad bad? Now you can see why I am also finding it valuable to bring this aspect of democracy with the reality. Because in a deeper understanding, the reality is a deeply interwoven, interconnected process. And that is why democracy becomes very valuable, because the democracy gives everyone the chance and the responsibility to understand, to accept, respect themselves and each other. But also through the responsibility to make it visible that if you don't take care, it can also get eroded, it can also get pulled into another direction. So democracy and freedom, because normally we think freedom is just being able to do what we want. But freedom has to be understood consciously. We all have different conditionings, and we think that when we can do what we want, then it is all fine. But when we realize that the more power we have, the more influential our doings become, then we also have a responsibility. In a period when the human beings didn't have so much power, when the science was not so much developed, it was not a big problem when everybody did something in their village and they lived their life. But now, for example, when we have atomic power, there are atomic reactors, and it is a big responsibility, because when an atomic reactor is getting damaged, is gone carelessly about, and radiation starts spreading, it is not a local thing. It is not somebody's private household thing. It's not belonging to one country or another country. It just goes around the globe, and it can pollute. And depending on the kind of explosion or pollution what is happening, it can spread everywhere. And you can see that in every area. What we see as ecological problems is just simply because we human beings don't yet realize clearly that all our acts have a certain interactive process. We cannot just go on blindly. In our blind way of going, we have been just looking what is convenient, what is practical, what is making it easy. And so, with the climate, with the plastic, with the kind of destruction which we are bringing to other living beings, the way we are treating other living beings, the way we are bringing through that destructive processes in our own nourishment, all this is reflecting our misunderstanding. And it is a high time. So, democracy is one step in that direction where we start bringing awareness. That what is called grassroots democracy is not just ideological concepts, it is bringing perception, bringing consciousness, bringing understanding, and bringing a deeper insight into the way life is manifesting, how things are interconnected. Of course, people who are going deeper in a conscious level, taking time for themselves, facing things, they start seeing it in a different way. But one can approach from different sides. People who are very sincerely concerned about something, and in their sincerity, in their attempt to take care, they start considering many factors. Then they start seeing how our conveniences and the welfare in one part is also connected with exploitation and misuse of facilities and people in other part. And sometimes when we don't see these aspects and we don't admit it in an honest way, we are only looking for what is convenient to us, what is advantageous to us. But as human beings, using our intelligence, using our creative potential, we are able to go differently and have a very healthy, harmonious, beautiful life for everybody. What we lack in this world is not on possibilities. We have everything to live in spite of this number of population which are there now. We can still live more creatively and gracefully, having everything for our needs. But what is real barrier is our entanglement in our misunderstandings, in our fears, in our greed, in our calculations, and the reactions coming from the values which are unconsciously being held on the basis of this kind of traps inside. We have to bring attention to these things. We have to look what is reality. We need to learn to face the reality the way it is. It is not about religions, and it is not about some esoteric, it is not about something far away. It is about awakening to the reality. The paradox in our life process you can see. There were people who were of deep understanding and love. They tried to share their understanding, and then it became a religion. And the religions often is passed on by people who interpret it in their way without often going deeper into the experiential understanding of the reality. And when you don't have the experiential understanding of this interconnectedness, the oneness of the reality, then your ways of dealing with things become very much based on divisive processes. Then fear and negativity dominates. Hate and manipulation goes parallel with it. Then there is violence, there is revengefulness, there is inhumanness in our way of going about dealing with each other. And we tend to turn away from things which are uncomfortable, and we have so many ways to engage ourselves so that we don't need to confront the reality. We are in a period where we need to confront the reality and go wakefully and intelligently beyond all these traps in political power or religious power, and start becoming human, start becoming wakeful to see life the way it is. And that is what consciousness is all about. You bring a way of looking without projecting through the conditioning, by observing the conditionings working in you, by seeing, understanding yourself more deeply. And spontaneously, naturally, you will see that what we have is a life which is deeply wondrous. The whole life process in this planet, with all its diversity, is manifesting through deep intelligence, through deep care, through deep playfulness, aesthetic sense. When you look at a flower, when you look at a bird, when you look at an animal, when you look at yourself without judgment, when you look into the eyes of a child, you see that the wonder is the basis of the reality. And the more you consider, the more you realize that the whole earth turning around itself in its own axis and going around the sun in a very specific circle makes it possible that we have day and night, makes it possible we have the seasons, makes it possible that the life on this planet can go on. And through the gravitational force, we are helped to be here, feel at ease. Even though the earth is spinning around itself, we feel comfortable. We sit here, we can just feel at ease. We feel so quiet because there's deep understanding and intelligence behind the whole manifestation of the life process. And the whole universe, the more you are having the distance to consider, the more you realize that we are part of wonder. We are part of this nature which is so miraculous, which is so magnificent. So, democracy is one step in this direction where we open to look and understand ourselves and life. And through that, we understand the beauty, the magnificence of diversity. We understand that we don't need to hurt and to punish and to destroy each other. We need to try to understand and help each other to understand themselves and realize what life is, what we are. So it is something very simple and significant. That is why I found it very relevant in this period of our life on this planet, that this understanding about democracy, freedom and consciousness is really coming into a central attention, to more wakeful consideration. It is our human responsibility. It is our human chance. And in spite of all the misunderstandings and mistakes, we are still in a shape, in a situation where we can correct, where we can learn from our mistakes and go forward in a loving, in a graceful, in an intelligent way, and make the life process really a development. We have been in so many ways so violent, so hurtful, and we are still continuing that towards other living beings, towards animals, towards nature. And this is an ongoing misunderstanding. We have to see that we have a responsibility. We have to see that we are part of one reality and we don't exist separately from the whole. And this has to become clear to us. And it becomes clear not because somebody else is telling you, only through your own careful consideration, by observing what way you are perceiving things, what way you are judging, what is behind the judgment, the standards and values, from where does it come? How does anger, violence and hate arise in oneself? Is it coming from your intelligence? Is it coming from your deeper understanding? Or is it just part of an automatism? When you look carefully, you can see that when you're really wakeful and present, you don't get trapped in the negative feelings. The negative feelings is part of a survival conditioning on the animal level. And the human being can now rise above this animal level and become truly human. This is our chance. This is our potential. This is our possibility. But it is an individual step. It is not that we can try to change the societies. It is not that we can change somebody else. We have to bring understanding. We have to bring insight. So that the way we communicate with each other, the way we respond to each other is not just following the old unconscious habit of force, intimidation, violence, manipulation, but more of insight, sensibility. And it's very interesting now during this pandemic, everywhere there are different attempts to control the spread of the sickness. But one thing which is very interesting to observe is those leaders who are communicating more heartily, not wanting to force and punish and to go in this kind of power way, but more from the sensibility of the heart, communicating, attempting to make things understandable. In their countries, the pandemic was not spreading so wildly. People were able to take it more. And the lockdowns were not becoming too heavy. And not only that, it prevented from it becoming too wild in the spreading of the sickness, but also the human challenges. People falling into depression, people falling into lost states. It also became different because there was some understanding. It is not forced. It's a very delicate process. When we have challenges, we want to go out of habit into forcing changes. Often we don't see any other way because we think that it has to be like that, it has to be controlled, it has to be imposed. But through imposing, we are trying to push each other back into the animal level. We are pushing each other into a certain stagnation, into a entanglement. Through communication, through bringing understanding, through deeper consideration of the situation and helping each other for that, which is not easy, which requires effort, which requires patience, which requires a very honest reflection within yourself when you are communicating. If you are not looking what is going on in you, if you only try to superficially force something, it is not going to work. But you can see that the political leaders who were going in that way, they were able to bring a different quality in the society. And in those places, the spreading was becoming less, and the psychological problems were much less. And it is now the vaccination process is coming, but you can see that when the awareness is there, it can reflect. And that is what one needs to do with all those who are opposing you, all those who are against certain things. You should try to understand them. It is not enough when we are just saying, oh, I know this is right and this has to be forced. No, it has to be through very careful, conscious consideration, bridged. Understanding has to be the orientation. Sometimes you may have to take certain emergency measures to prevent certain things from becoming more destructive. But still, it will not be from a revengeful basis. It will not be from a hate basis. It will not be from a negative basis. It will be looking how to deal with the situation in the best possible way. Then you consider the welfare of everybody. Otherwise, we perpetuate a destructive process, and this destructive process becomes self-destructive. When we go on in this unconscious violence, we are consuming ourselves, we are destroying this planet, we are going into a great misunderstanding. But we don't need to get trapped in it. And life, and the life process has given us human beings a respectful state. We are not evolving automatically into some so-called goodness. It is left to us. We have to understand what is good. Why is the good good and why is the bad bad? The bad is that what is coming from not considering the reality deeply. Those who become destructive, those who become, so to speak, criminal, because they don't have yet a perspective, they don't have yet the right understanding. One needs to look how to contain it, how to bring understanding there, not just punishing and going destructively. So when one starts very carefully, very honestly to consider, to respond to unsensibility and misunderstanding by bringing understanding, by removing the misunderstanding and bringing consciousness, bringing insight. It is not just words, it is helping everyone to see, helping everyone to understand. It is not trying to argue with somebody and win an argument. It is really helping the other also to see. It is a respectful process. And the respectful process can happen only when we see ourselves that we are part of this wonder. We have a responsibility. We are given a tremendous opportunity to be able to be here in this life process. We come with nothing, we have to go with nothing. But during this period when we are here, we can live gracefully, beautifully, lovingly with each other. And that requires more insight, more understanding. It's not easy. To react blindly, to go into destructive process comes automatically. To destroy, you don't need much intelligence. It comes very easily. But to be creative, it requires more insight, more consideration, more patience, more honesty. And it's an adventure. Human life is an adventure. But that is what makes life so beautiful. We have to learn to learn. We have to go on learning. Each moment is new. Each situation is new. And when we are open to look and consider by observing our own automatic processes and not letting ourselves get overtaken by it, we create the right basis. Sometimes you can see in simple situations, for example, a child is going and it sees a leaf which has fallen down, or a stone, or a simple branch, and it's fascinated. It finds it so beautiful. It wants to carry it home. It wants to take it and keep it very carefully. Maybe the grown-up who sees it only as a kind of dirt sees it differently and may get upset. Why you are carrying such dirt? But for the child, it is open to look. It is not yet trapped in knowledge. And when we are also not getting trapped in knowledge, we have the possibility to understand life more deeply. It is our chance.